Welcome to another episode of KFUG's Community Square. I'm Heather Polen, your hostess, and today I am incredibly privileged and honored to hold the microphone for Megan Postma, and I will let her take it away. If you would like to, Megan. I guess the best way to start this is like they say in Alice in Wonderland, right? The Mad Hatter. When telling a story, it's best to start at the beginning, and when you get to the end, stop.
I love that. And I think that that's probably the best way to kind of tell the story of how things have transpired over the last almost year exactly. I have been fortunate enough to have a lot of pleasant memories in Crescent City. I spent my honeymoon there. I sometimes drive out just for lunch. Something that is important to me to have in my life. And when I was there for the Kane Smith concert in April of last year, 2025, that was the idea, just a kind of a weekend getaway. And I did not expect what happened to transpire the way that it did. And then to be in the midst of it with my truth and what I was walking out, and then learning what was actually happening behind the scenes really impacted me in ways that I didn't know that were possible.
Okay, for those who don't know what happened and what transpired that Easter Sunday of it was Easter Sunday. It was after midnight. So in the early hours of Easter morning of 25.
Yeah, so I was at the Kane Smith concert at Elk Valley Casino, and my husband was running audio for the casino, and I was there just enjoying myself. The concert let out, and typically what happens when my husband and I come and stay for a weekend like that is we would stay in a hotel in Crescent City. And so at 10 p.m., I left to head back to the hotel, and my husband stayed behind to load up their equipment. And I came down to 101 from Sand Mine Road and went to make a right-hand turn. And I was rear-ended from behind on the passenger side of my vehicle. And that person that hit me was Randy Hooper. And immediately what happened was the impact, and his car ended up about 5 to 7 feet in front of my vehicle on the right-hand side. What I've come to learn is he was most likely looking to pass me on the inside, which there wasn't anywhere to pass. There's not a lane there. And his vehicle stopped for about 15 seconds after the impact, and I was very shaken up. I was pushed out onto Highway 101 into what would have been oncoming traffic had there been some. I think because of the late hour, there wasn't a lot, but the cars that did end up coming, they did slow down and avoided further impact, which could have been very detrimental for both of us being stopped on Highway 101 northbound. And I counted for about 5 seconds, 5 1,000s in my head, thinking to just pull over to the right-hand side. And his car didn't move.
Just for a second here. No, it's okay. I'm interrupting you. When I heard you say that in court and read those things, because I've been out to the majority of these court cases, I always thought that was odd. And then I found out that you work for the county in Health and Human Services. So is that part of your training for reports and things like that, is to do those things? Because I wouldn't think to count how long somebody waited before they took off.
It's funny because you're not the first person to ask that. And it actually comes from being raised by just my dad, just me and him. And so my dad is, he's just that, his mind works that way. And so growing up, I knew the speed limits and where they were posted for, I grew up in Sacramento, so all of the different freeways and interstates. And I'm very directionally savvy with my northbound and my southbound. And I just account that all to how I was raised and the way that I was spoken to by my dad. And I've been in previous car accidents, drunk driving accidents,
Okay.
unfortunately, as well as hit and run accidents. And so it's not my first rodeo. And I
Okay,
kind of
gotcha.
know,
So
yeah,
it
know
was
how
based on
to
your own
and what
personal
to
life.
say.
So you're based on your
Yeah.
own personal life experiences why you could, because I was just like, I would never think to do that. I apologize. So go ahead and continue with you
No,
counted,
that's okay.
and
Yeah,
then
I counted and got to about the 5 1,000 mark and realized his car wasn't moving, and so I kind of just stayed put, thinking, he was in front of me, and so the appropriate thing would be for him to, start pulling over, and then I would just pull in behind him, and that didn't happen, and so I continued counting, and about the 10 1,000 mark, I thought the vehicle's going to run, they're going to take off, and I just in my mind thought, no way, and I obviously didn't know how bad the impact was to the back of my car. And I remember at about the 1,000 mark, his vehicle did start to pull away, and it didn't pull away to the shoulder. It pulled away moving forward at a pretty high rate of speed from the jump. And I thought, in my brain, split second, I said, well, if I'm going to push on the gas pedal, and if my car goes, then I guess I'm going to follow him. This is what we're doing. And I pushed on the gas pedal, and my car went, and I followed him until his vehicle started to slow. So I would say about another 5 to 15 seconds, as I was simultaneously picking up my phone to dial 911. And as soon as 911 dispatch came on, I had a officer pulling up on the shoulder coming from behind me. And at that point, as soon as that officer got there, everything clicked. And what I mean by everything clicked was when I left the casino, I walked out by myself. There wasn't any, situations happening. There wasn't more than normal staff or security or anything like that. It was calm. It was, chill. And as I was driving down San Mine Road to leave, there were two officers that came flying past me going in the opposite direction back to the casino. And I thought, wow, I just left. Like something must have happened. Wow, that just transpired really quickly. And so when dispatch answered and the officer came from behind on the right-hand side with his lights on, flying towards Mr. Hooper's vehicle that was now starting to veer off the side of the road, it kind of like, in my mind, it clicked like, oh, this must be related to that, and why that vehicle came from pretty much nowhere from behind me and hit me and then chose to keep going. And I was very shaken up at that point. My 911 call probably sounds a lot more frantic than the conversation that you and I are having now. Obviously, I was hyperventilating and just kind of an out-of-body experience for sure by the time I was stopped. And I would say within 10 to 15 seconds of being stopped, there were 3 other sheriff's vehicles there. And the first officer that approached his car that came up first went to talk to him, and the other officers shortly stopped afterwards. And once there were other officers on the scene, that first officer came to my vehicle to talk to me. And it turns out he was actually the third officer that was responding to the call at the casino. And the 2 officers that had passed me when I was coming down San Mine, he was trying to catch up to the 2 of them to also respond to that call at the casino. And he was just getting ready to make the left-hand turn off of 101 onto San Mine, and he saw the sparks flying from the accident that happened. And when he saw the sparks, he immediately turned around, and the sparks were Mr. Hooper's vehicle leaving the scene with parts dragging from where the impact had happened.
So from the photos
And
I remember seeing in court, the wheel well in the front driver's side of his truck were severely damaged and bent sideways. And that's what you're referring to as throwing the sparks?
I believe it was the front bumper, and then that was initially dragging. And then what I believe happened based on the pictures and the way that the accident proceeded to transpire as he drove away was the vehicle was going very fast as he was driving away with not like the intent. I think that his defense attorney tried to sway in court that he was trying to find the closest appropriate place to pull out on the highway. It was more so, I need to get away from what's happening. And I think the vehicle itself didn't have the capacity to continue any further. And that makes sense with the way that the vehicle slowed kind of abruptly and then started to veer off to the side.
And that's what the
And I think that
CHP.
is because.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. That's what I believe happened. Yeah, from the vehicle, the front tire becoming completely disabled on the driver's side to where the vehicle wouldn't go any further.
And it's my understanding too that that's what the CHP officer, if I remember correctly, the CHP officer testified that it was his professional opinion that the vehicle stopped because it was incapacitated, not because he was looking for a safe place to go, and something about there being plenty of space for him to have stopped prior to that. So
that's absolutely correct. What officer and I had testified to was that he didn't have any concern about any of the shoulder leading up to that turnout across from the I think it was the Crescent Beach Motel. That if he were pulling a driver over, that there would have been appropriate space to pull off the side of the road, and in fact had done that numerous times on that stretch of highway without any concern of being in the highway.
Yeah, as you say that, that's a very, it brings it back to my mind of being in that court case and hearing that evidence. I don't even remember what they call it, where they have the hearing where they bring all of the evidence together and they present it. That's almost word for what he said.
Yeah, the preliminary hearing was when we went in front of Judge Olson, and that was where the 17B motion was also brought up to initially ask to drop the charges. And that's where I think I learned the most of how things transpired that night. That really impacted me the most.
What is it that impacted you the most? I mean, because it's not just the collision that is seared. That appears to me, that's my opinion, but it appears to me that this is like seared in your brain. What about that preliminary hearing did you learn that had that impact on you more than just the collision?
I've kind of processed and talked about a ton, and just really tried to pull back the layers in all of the feelings during that hearing. And I will say the most impactful thing was sitting in the audience and having Mr. Hooper's wife sitting in the section next to me, and the things that she probably was also hearing for the first time, that we were both probably had a lot of emotion. And it was that first humanized it for me to sit there with Mr. Hooper and the defense attorney and all the things that were leading up to having this preliminary hearing. And I really didn't have any idea of what it was going to look like. And that was the first, like, maybe gut punch. It wasn't just me hearing it for the first time, but it was his wife having to hear it for the first time. And that really broke my heart because I have some family members who have also been through some situations in the past with their spouses. And it really just kind of, again, it humanized what was happening and kind of, broke my heart a little bit.
Can you,
and then go ahead.
Can you explain to me about you mean about it humanizing it? And because you're human and you were severely injured in this. So how did just the compassion, the empathy that you had for his wife in this situation, is that?
Yeah, so I think from the moment that the accident happened to going to the emergency room and, getting my car, getting home back to Grants Pass and notifying my employer and getting my car transported to the collision place to start repairs on it. And, um, just the things that you don't know because you're no longer in that space and you're reading online about how it's being reported. And um, probably the first way that I realized how big that this was going to be, again, prior to the preliminary hearing, was I was checking online to find out, what happened, if there was an arrest made, because it was my understanding that it would be made, but I did leave and proceed to my hotel that night prior to him being taken away. He was in the back of the police car while I was taking pictures of the vehicle for my insurance. And getting to my hotel and, having that adrenaline and all those things, as I started to, those layers came down and we drove home that night, and you just kind of put the mindset on of like, I have to do the next right thing. You're not really paying much attention to what actually happened. And so reading the things online, and then I found the website that reports the arrests, the Del Norte Citizen RIMS. And that was where it first kind of hit me, seeing the charges and his name there.
Did you know
And
his name is?
realizing,
I'm sorry, I interrupted you again. Did you know his name is Randy Hooper as being the assistant CAO of Del Norte County, or did you learn that later?
I did not know that the night that it happened. I did get out of my vehicle and ask the officers to walk me over to his vehicle to take pictures. And so I did have his license plate and was able to provide that to my insurance company, who then initiated my claim. And the following day, I was able to see my claim online and they were able to pull his license plate. So that was how I was able to connect the dots. Again, this is the non-human side of things. It's just the process oriented and the, you have a name, but you don't have a face, and you just seem, knowing that he's, a father and a husband and has a high position at the county. It's just a name, and the website was showing the charges, and it blew my mind to see that the charges were listed as 3 felonies with an enhancement. That really shocked me with how it was. I like to say the book thrown at somebody. I don't know if that's an appropriate way to say it, but for it being Highway Patrol's jurisdiction, I commend them for treating it as seriously as it felt to me. Again, the process-oriented side of things, not the mindset of, we're going to actually be face-to-face with somebody and another, the person who did it, and the remorse, and actually learning what happened behind the scenes and how it could have been avoided, and the risk that was tried to be mitigated by the casino, and, all of those things that factor into the human side of things. And then myself being a recovering alcoholic, that piece also, in my mind, I knew that he was inebriated at the time because I did see him in the back of the police car as I walked over to take pictures, and the officers were trying to get him to, blow in the meter. And then to read the police report really kind of solidified that he was intoxicated. And when we got the actual blood alcohol back showing that he was 3 times the legal limit, really, is impactful. And all these, again, happened prior to seeing him in court. All of these things are just things that I'm reading, things that I'm talking about with, family members and processing, but I'm not actually coming face to face with it. And so that's where this was the first time at the preliminary hearing, sitting down and seeing him and seeing, his wife and being there with the advocate and, everybody. It was very, a very formal setting, but then it seemed like it went not informal in an inappropriate way, but informal into like the story of what happened, not, again, my truth of what I lived out that night, but what was working behind the scenes. And when I realized that he was also at the casino and was there at the concert, the first thing I did was I went back to my phone camera log, and it blew my mind once I matched his picture online when the articles started to come out to that's the back of his head in my videos that I'm taking at this concert. We were literally in the same venue, watching the same, listening to the same songs, being around the same people, and for this to have happened really was, that's where it kind of another gut punch, I would say. How did that happen? How did we get here?
So you didn't have any run-ins with him at the casino or any problems? You didn't recognize somebody that has been drinking and was off to the side and thought maybe they'd had too much or anything else, but you saw his videos later? Is that kind of what you're...
Yeah, I didn't no interaction with him at the time, but when I went back to look at the videos and pictures that I had, I was sitting in the back with the audio crew who was running sound. So I wasn't out on the floor anywhere. And I mean, everybody, the back of everybody's head was in my videos and pictures. But it definitely, I was able
Gotcha.
to track and see where he was and, you know, had a drink in his hand. And that's where it kind of started to feel like, wow, this is a bigger deal than I thought it was. And then again, to find out all the things that we found out at the preliminary hearing, um, really started to put the bigger picture into play.
Okay, so there's two questions I have for you there. What made you realize it was a bigger deal than you thought it was, and then what was, I guess, the most upsetting or shocking or startling? Because I still, like, even as we're having this conversation and we're talking about it, I still, like, I can feel that same, oh my God, in my chest. And I can't imagine what this conversation is for you or what all of that was for you. So if you can kind of help people understand, one, what you experienced through this process and how it affects you.
I really think that the most impactful part of the process was to find out the position that he held, um, and to know that this was going to go one of two ways. Either there was going to be an example made, or it was going to be brushed under the rug. And from that first article that I read, I believe it was with the triplicate was the first to report on it. And I learned who he was and the position that he held. That, you know, one of two ways, it just didn't feel like there was a gray area. And not knowing enough about the politics of Crescent City prior to all of this, felt that, you know, it was a very black and white situation. And the layers that started to get pulled back first, that indicated that something was bigger than it actually was the website that I had mentioned earlier that reports arrests. That was something that I kind of checked periodically. And I would say probably about a month after the accident or a little bit sooner, his record disappeared from that website. Not any of the other arrests that night, not any of the arrests that happened after that, but his.
Wait,
And
wait, hold on a second. I'm sorry. I don't mean to keep interrupting you. I apologize, Megan.
that's okay.
His arrest record is no longer publicly available.
On the website that reports arrests, the Del Norte Citizen RIMS website. So it's not the police department or the court system. I'm not sure how that's reported, but the website that shows, you know, the arrests, what
Wow.
his record disappeared on there, and that was the first like indication in my mind that this was going more towards being swept under the rug than being having an example made out of.
How long after the first time you saw it until it disappeared? Because
It
I
was there
didn't...
the following day. That night, I guess I was, the first time I saw it was in the emergency room, so it would be Easter morning, probably about 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. was the first time it popped up, showing the arrest record, and that's where I was able to see the charges and that he was taken into custody. And then I checked back on that periodically, and I would say, like I said, about a month or a little bit shy of a month, that record from that night disappeared. And so my first thought was like, oh, there's more to this. And at that point, formal charges had not been brought on by the DA's office. And so I was reaching out and saying like, hey, what's going on? Like, why is this arrest record disappeared? And nobody could really give me any information because the formal charges hadn't been brought. And that also again felt like it's that unknown of like, well, what's actually happening? Like, why haven't the charges been brought? And I feel I feel for the victims advocacy department because they did hear from me quite a bit before the formal charges were brought. And once they were, those conversations happened, and nobody seemed to know why that happened and why it disappeared and whatnot. And then at the preliminary hearing was where um, Mr. Hooper's defense attorney brought the 17B motion, which included all of the letters of recommendation, including from the sheriff. And I understand that he didn't intend for his letter to reach the courts in the way that it did. And I do respect that that probably wasn't his intention. However, it at the time, it didn't look good. And what it did for me was, again, re-solidify this looks like it's going more towards getting pushed, swept under the rug than held accountable. And that, I think, is what has impacted me the most, that I really believe in justice. And I understand that it looks different in every situation. And I believe in accountability. And it felt very early on that accountability was something that we weren't going to see happen, and was kind of playing out that way from the beginning, from that record disappearing to nobody really wanting to talk to me, to finding out that it was going to be prosecuted by somebody from the AG's office, from Rob Bonta's office, and then nobody at Rob Bonta's office would contact me back because I was supposed to be in contact with the people there at the local level. It was like, well, we're going to have a local person represent Rob Bonta's office. And what that looks like is they just get to bill their hours to the AG's office. But we're also going to have you stay at the local level for victims advocacy. We're not going to refer that out. And I just think that things would have went very differently had the venue been changed from Crescent City to a different county from the very beginning. And maybe somebody brought in from Sacramento to represent Rob Bonta's office, which was my heart behind reaching out and saying, like, I don't think that this is appropriate to just have somebody there locally bill their hours differently, because that doesn't change anything really. The
Right.
relationships are established, and it doesn't take the impartialness out of it.
So you contacted the Attorney General for the state of California's office, and they told you that they're taking the case, but it's going to be tried by a local person from our local DA's office.
When I reached out to them, they are not somebody that you can just call and they answer the phone. It's you call and leave a message. And so I left several messages, and nobody actually ever called me back from their office. What I was told was everything that I heard and was told and advised of how this process was going to look was at the local level through my victims advocate, prior to any hearings or anything like that. That it was the AG's office. And when I log into the court's websites, it shows represented by the person who was there at the local office, but they were on behalf of the AG's office. And so it was kind of disheartening to not have anybody reach back out to me from their office and say, we understand, we hear you, we see what's going on, and we agree that this is too close knit of a community to say just because the hours are being billed differently that it's changing really anything in the conflict of interest realm.
Right. I struggle with that too personally, because you talked about believing in justice, right? There's the moral and the ethical of justice and mercy, right? Our symbol for justice is a woman who's blindfolded holding a scale. Do you feel that by having Keith Morris from the prosecutor's office prosecute the case on behalf of the DA, wasn't sufficient? That he was still getting special treatment because of his position with the county?
I do.
Okay.
And I believe that that's where all of the disconnect happened. Without I'm not sitting here wanting to, point fingers or shift blame anywhere to anybody. I think that there were a lot of opportunities that were missed in that process of how it was handled. And I do believe that that begins with Keith Morris and the conversations that were had, just to the conversations after the preliminary hearing. Was the first time I met with Keith Morris face to face with my victim's advocate and my sister-in-law and Jennifer Williams, who testified as the investigator. And the conversations that were had, and the my heart behind it and what I wanted to see versus what it looked like in the court's eyes, and what I felt leaving there assured was going to happen, did not happen in any aspect moving forward.
What was your understanding after that meeting that would take place and what would happen?
The conversation that I had with Mr. Morris at that time was that the hit and run and the DUI charges couldn't be charged together, and that the hit and run was the weaker of the two charges, and that his thought process was to drop the hit and run charge and prosecute the DUI as a felony. And I told him that I would absolutely be okay with that as long as the DUI was prosecuted as a felony. And he chose to prosecute it as a wobbler and allow it to be treated as a misdemeanor.
Okay, so even though in that initial arraignment or indictment hearing where they brought forth all of the evidence, he advocated to keep it as a felony. And then he told you after that meeting he was going to try to continue to as a felony. What do you mean that it became a wobbler and then he didn't?
So yeah, it's I've learned a lot more in this process about the law than I think I wanted to. But in California, when a DUI is prosecuted, it can be charged as a wobbler. So depending on the circumstances of how it transpired, and really the severity of it, bodily injury to the victim, and property damages and whatnot, the severity of it allows it to be charged as a felony or a misdemeanor. And that is solely based on who is prosecuting it. So Mr. Morris, being the representative from the AG's office, is given the power in the courtroom to choose if he wants to prosecute it as a misdemeanor or a felony. And that initial preliminary hearing before Judge Olson was to allow the 17B motion to be heard, which was looking to drop the charges, and then for her to determine if it would be prosecuted as a misdemeanor at that time or if it would be pushed over to felony court. And her judgment at that time was for it to be pushed over to felony court, and that was originally supposed to be seen before Judge McElfresh. And that was another kind of hiccup towards the end where it didn't go that way. That again brought in a lot more skepticism on my end that it would be looking more to be swept under the rug than held accountable. And so Mr. Morris, in the beginning, I felt was on my team and he understood. And I was, pretty shaken up after that initial preliminary hearing. And I think that he really did hear my heart behind, my goal wasn't to destroy Mr. Hooper. It wasn't to, take him out of his position at work. It wasn't to, bash who he is in the community or what he's done for Crescent City or what he can do in the future. It was really just to be held accountable for the negligence on his part throughout the night, throughout the casino secured a taxi for him that night. He chose not to take it. They told him, if you leave, we're going to call the cops. Earlier in the night, he gave an incorrect name at the casino prior to all this happening. And
he was Mauricio.
He was. Yeah, he was. And, again, all of those things that you find out through the preliminary hearing. There's some other things that I don't really want to go into because I don't think they're relevant, but they are relevant to how it transpired, just the level of, I think,
so I just
inferiority that he has.
Right. Because he did. tell that according to the reports from the staff telling through the investigation that he said that he knew they're like, don't you know who I am? And then he stated that he knew everybody at the sheriff's department. And what you're not sharing because you don't think they're relevant are the embarrassing aspects of this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Right. And we didn't share them either because it's we viewed it as sensationalizing it. So even now, as frustrated as you are with everything that's transpired and you knew how this played out, you're still protecting his dignity. That
Absolutely.
that's how I'm taking this.
Absolutely.
You're still seeing this as a human story. This is a family's story. This is in the age of the internet and information exists forever, whether it's accurate or not. You're trying to preserve his dignity and his family's dignity.
100%.
Okay. And I'm just through this entire process, and I'm not going to say that what we've texted about that's not appropriate, but through the text that we've shared and the questions that I've asked you leading up to this conversation, it's been to me that you have always had compassion for him and his family, and you referenced earlier that you're an alcoholic and you're sober. In court, you said you had been sober for 6 years. Have you been able to remain sober through this whole process, or has the stress kind of affected that in any
I
way?
have. I celebrated 7 years sober, March 26th of this
Aw,
year. And yeah,
congratulations.
thank you. It was probably one of the hardest years in my sobriety, to be honest. And I'm not going to lie to you, Heather, there were definitely several occasions throughout the last year where I felt that picking up alcohol would have, um, in the moment, solved a lot of my problems. But I know that really it just creates more in the long run, and that's not who I am anymore. And it was a challenging year in that aspect for sure, and especially throughout this process of my goal in treating my injuries was to be conservative, and my medical teams was definitely to be conservative as far as chiropractic, massage, acupuncture, all of the things that you do to prevent having surgery, which would have a lot more lasting impact. That time was pushing through the pain and not really seeing an end in sight, and having to use narcotic medication at a higher level than I was prior to the accident. I unfortunately also have a bad foot from a drunk driving accident that happened back in 2010, where I was hit head on by a drunk driver. And I didn't walk for about a year and have had 8 surgeries on my right foot, including hardware put in. And so I do live in a very significant amount of pain every day, and this really intensified that. And so knowing that I can be, two things can be true. I can be in recovery from alcohol, and I can also use a narcotic pain medication appropriately that doesn't take me to a place where alcohol is the next step, where I know for a lot of people in recovery, even myself in the beginning, it's something that you try to stay away from. It was something that I think I had prided myself on being able to have both be true. And through this process, having to increase that pain medication, I think definitely took me to a place of more the ability to look at it as, well, alcohol wouldn't be that bad at this point because I already feel so far gone. And so I'm trying to treat everything conservatively. Did unfortunately end up still in a place of where I did need to have surgery, and then, even higher pain medication after that to treat the repercussions of surgery. And I'm grateful to say that I no longer am taking any pain medication at this point, and that's just has been my choice to slowly taper that off and really see what I have been left with as far as daily function and what my pain level is on a regular basis. And so, again, thank you for recognizing my sobriety, and I do think that a lot of what has impacted this in my personal life so much is, the sting of getting hit by a drunk driver when you're sober hits a little bit different.
I suppose. I'm incredibly proud of you for staying sober and for making it through that year. And just so people are aware, you've had 2 surgeries and you've lost your job since this accident. Well, I guess is
I
it an accident if somebody, I don't know. I don't know.
that's I share in that thought process with you because yeah, the first thing was how can a crime be an accident? Um, but I learned very quickly that people don't refer to it as a crime until it's actually been prosecuted and charges have stuck. And so I really still kind of live in that unknown of was it an accident or was it a crime? Because yeah. Um, yes, and sorry that just took me to a place of kind of that in between where I've found myself trying to make sense of because I do think that it's important to name it um, to be able to move past it. So yes, I have had 2 surgeries, and as the result of having the surgeries and still having follow-up care till to this day, I did have to step away from my employment in December, and that was through a medical separation completely. So I am no longer employed by the state of Oregon.
So you worked for Josephine County.
Yes, Department of Human Services.
Okay. So, wow, there's a lot here. There's just
Yeah.
a lot here. I don't even, I mean, like, I genuinely feel bad that you've lost your job because of something one of my neighbors did. And I just feel this urge to apologize for it and tell you how sorry I am that that happened to you when you visited Crescent City, and especially hearing in court how much you love the area. Um, I'm truly sorry for the impact this has had on you, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. I read the letter that your sister-in-law wrote and cried. I'm genuinely sorry for what this has done to your family when you came to visit us.
Thank you, Heather. It means a lot, and I will say that everybody that I have interacted with from the community since this happened, from people that live there, casino staff that I know through my husband, being out there and I being out there, to strangers that uh, I happened to be sitting on a lawn with at the 4th of July. My husband was out working another event, 4th of July, knowing that they knew the situation um, and also felt for me and uh, did their best. I shout out the casino for doing their best to mitigate the risk and doing everything in their power and doing it right.
Oh,
I
Elk
don't think
Valley's
we get to
amazing,
see that.
right?
Yeah,
They're
very
really
often.
take that seriously. I live in the area where they are, and I'm incredibly proud of the things that they do and the work that they do to make sure that we're safe as people leave the casino. And so, thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, I love that, and just the support that I've been met with from people in the community that don't know me and really just have seen the story through the lens of news outlets and whatnot, have also been very supportive and very encouraging, and I think that that's definitely helped me through this process to know that as much as I want to turn towards the cynicism and that again it is a human aspect to it, and to live in the cynical is not something that I want to do, and that's part of what it looks like to go back towards the unhealthy habits that lead into my alcoholism specifically. And so I think your apology and just the people that I have been met with that have been very compassionate and very intentional have helped keep it human, because through the court system after the preliminary hearing it felt very process oriented. It felt like I wasn't heard. It felt like it didn't matter what I said or how many letters I wrote or how I expressed myself or what I wanted to convey really mattered. It just was, if I don't do it, then I'm going to regret it later.
Wow. Megan, we've been talking for a little bit. If you don't mind, we'll go ahead and end the conversation here. And then start a new conversation and talk to you again a little bit later about this process and what it is that you've gone through?
That sounds great. Thank
Okay.
you, Heather. Thanks for your time.
All right. So this has been another episode of KFUG Community Square. If you would like to join the conversation, you can email communitysquare at kfuglp.org. Thank you, Megan. This is another episode of KFUG Community Square, where we hold the microphone for you. We are going to do our second conversation with Megan Postma. If you didn't hear the first one, you can go back and search for that. And Megan, where we left off the last time was talking about the human aspect of this and the disconnect within the court systems. Would you like to go ahead and continue that part of the conversation?
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to pick up. I will say that I think the most impactful piece of the court system was after the preliminary hearing with Judge Olson, where she did choose to continue the charges over to felony court. And again, I'm, the process side of things, I'm in Grants Pass. I'm not here locally. I don't really know much. And so I have, the internet really to depend on. And so, looking up the names of people within the court system and the judges and, people representing me and the victims advocate website and all of those things was really what I had to go off of. And from what I heard through people there at the DA's office, people in the community that, even just maybe some Facebook responses to things that had happened currently in my situation and other situations, that I felt very confident going in front of Judge McElfresh, who the court was originally going to be looked at under felony court with him. And I felt that was maybe where we were going to start looking at some accountability, just again, from things that I read, not anything that I knew personally. And to learn that he was not actually going to be the judge on the case and that it was going to go to Judge Follett. The thing that I came to know very quickly about him is that he was a retired judge. And I think the first thing that popped into my mind was, oh, great. He has no court of public opinion for reelection that he has to worry about. And this is going to look like the Wild Wild West.
Do you know if McElfresh recused himself or was it just reassigned?
To the best of my knowledge, it was reassigned.
Okay. So he didn't.
The court's website doesn't say if it was recused for the judge, but I do know that Judge Follett in the beginning did unprovoked address the court and tell them that that this was not a conflict of interest for him and that he did not have any I guess reservations about being able to be impartial through the process.
Judge McElfresh did that or Judge Follett did?
No, Judge Follett did that.
Okay, so he was basically saying, give me this case? Because that's kind of what I hear when you say that.
I think it was more so just probably for the record of, him being, I don't know. Again, I don't know how judges are assigned and who assigns them or how that gets chosen or anything. But when the website did change from McElfresh to Follett, I did contact the victims advocacy and just questioned, hey, what does this look like? I do see that he's a retired judge and I have some concerns about that. And so I don't know if my concerns were brought up behind the scenes, but he did address the court at the very first time that we were in front of him, that he didn't really have a stake in the case as far as being able to not prosecute it appropriately,
okay,
or impartially. And I thought again, that kind of felt like it was maybe like, why do you need to say that? Why was that important to say? Why
Yeah.
was that what you chose to say?
And I
Kind of
don't,
caught me off guard.
right. And I don't want to jump to conclusions one way or the other. I don't know what happened behind the scenes. And I'm going to make that very clear. But I would like to know how you feel about, obviously you're a little skeptical, I think, is what you're trying to convey there about what Judge Follett said at that first hearing. Do you feel that it was impartial?
In the beginning, I did. And I think that was just my hopefulness of, well, we're finally in front of a judge, 6 months plus later. And this is finally being looked at. And I think just the goal of like, I want to get this behind me. And I think that this will take away a lot of what I'm walking through in my personal life if we can just get the court side of things handled. And by the last hearing, the most recent actual sentencing hearing that happened, just hearing how little regard was spoken for what I experienced versus how he was weighing on Mr. Hooper's background and past, and his exemplary record prior to this and his exemplary record since this, and doing all the right things. I just it almost felt like he had the stage a lot more than I did, and that's where I felt was just kind of odd to the truth doesn't really need a full explanation is kind of something that I've always had in the background in my mind. When people start to maybe over explain a little bit, it 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 feels a little like, well, maybe it didn't need to be that drawn out if it was actually honest. And not that those things aren't honest, not that he didn't have an exemplary record before and after. That's not what I'm saying, but just the space that was held to communicate to the court and everybody that was there why his decision was going to be his decision, regardless of what I had walked through, and the fact that my medical bills totaled $100,000, and property damages to my vehicle, and all the things that I walked through as a victim that the law is put in place to protect and is written to protect victims, especially in California. There are a lot of protections in place for victims. I think was the biggest letdown at the end. It's like we had all this lead up, and we went through all these processes, and we heard all the things, and it did go in the very black and white way that I had talked about previously, where it did feel very black and white. It didn't feel like there was a gray area in that sentencing, especially after the probation report and what I feel was maybe not used to its fullest.
What was in the probation report that you think should have been used that wasn't?
The probation report definitely looked at both of our sides of the story, and regardless of the things that Mr. Hooper was doing appropriately by the court's eyes, and the classes and the treatment and all the things that were definitely good things to be doing, they still recommended felony probation. That was the recommendation by out of county probation department. And
that was done by the Shasta County Probation Department, correct?
That's correct, yes. And that report left me feeling that was the only piece of hope that I really was holding on to moving forward after that was done, was, wow, somebody's finally seeing, somebody's finally articulating it, that this is serious, that this, and felony probation, I think, where people kind of get, well, felony is felony and misdemeanor is misdemeanor. The probation looks very different for both of the two. And from the beginning, my heart was for, again, accountability, and accountability looks like felony probation in my eyes. And again, not to say that, I want him to lose his job, because you can't have a felony and, be in public service in the position that you're in, and all those things. But the accountability looks very different. It's a lot more formal. It's a lot more intense. It's a lot more involved and supervised rather than informal through a misdemeanor. And I think that that's where, the consequences of your actions really prevent you from making those choices again, not mistakes, but choices in the future. And that's my heart for this whole case, is that nobody else has to go through what I went through. And heaven forbid accountability not happen and someone realize that, it's not as serious, or they, can quote get away with something, that leads them to believe, as an alcoholic myself, we realize, oh yeah, I got away with that. I'm probably invincible and I can keep going and it's not that bad. And before you know it, you've destroyed your life to the point where, I would hate to have, something more serious happen again and somebody get killed. And that's really what it comes down to of, if we're not held accountable and consequences don't happen, we do, I think as humans, we do think like, oh, well, probably can, drive intoxicated again, just, maybe not be as intoxicated next time. And
that's not the first time I've
it's
heard
a fine line.
Right? That's not the first time I've heard you alluding to that. In the motion to reduce the charges, Judge Olson asked you if you'd like to speak, and that's where I first heard you say about your struggles with addiction. And you were trying to convey it appears to me that you were trying to convey that that you had some compassion for him, but that you understood that accountability was what kept you sober, right? Not just you personally, but what kept an addict sober was having that full accountability. And if it was completely removed from him, that it wasn't beneficial to him. Is that kind of what you're saying now? That it's
Absolutely. And the community that he continues to be involved in, that's the safety of the community is why laws are written, why things are in place, why courts exist, why judges are judges, why charges happen. And it just felt like a miscarriage of justice, really, through that whole process of why do we have these things in place if we allow consequences to not happen. I mean, yes, consequences for Mr. Hooper in this case look like, misdemeanor probation and AA classes. And while those are all good things, I don't really believe that they're consequences. I believe that they are opportunities to prevent it from happening again, but it's not a consequence to go to AA. It's not a consequence to have an interlock in your vehicle. It's not a consequence to walk through misdemeanor probation being informal.
Yeah, so he just has to tell somebody if he's going out of state. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
I could be completely wrong on that. What do you think accountability is in this situation?
I think accountability is consequence. I think consequence looks like it's very different, because if it was in this case and maybe he wasn't as intoxicated, or maybe he didn't actually take off and just had pulled over to the right hand side there immediately, that would have given me more reason to say like, okay, that makes sense that we're looking at it as the wobbler being charged as a misdemeanor. But there it was, the 3 felony charges with the enhancement, and now we look at 1 misdemeanor, and that's not accountability. Accountability looks like, having somebody else involved, and in this environment, that somebody else looks like a probation department, having check-ins with probation, having follow-ups, randomly needing to be tested potentially. I don't know what his day-to-day life looks like, but I do know what the probation report said. And this series of events that happened sound like they could have happened at any time for him prior to this happening, based on how he explained his choices to use alcohol and how he used alcohol. And that is impactful because I think it was a perfect storm, right? All these things happened and now here we are. And I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful that he's alive. I'm grateful that we didn't, come into contact with anybody else on the road and nobody else was injured in this. And it could have gone very differently. And so I think accountability in this really should have come from that probation report. And I think that's why I held a lot of hope through that once the courts would read it, that they would see that, this is a bigger beast than just a one night incident where I accidentally drank too much and didn't realize what I was doing and made some really poor choices, and I'm sorry for them. And I really messed up. I think this was it was waiting to happen. And it unfortunately happened to me. And yeah, that's when you kind of break it down that way in my mind, it's like almost like another gut punch. Why did it have to be me that this happened to?
Yeah.
So accountability looks like, I think, another agency involved, probation involved, and I don't think we get to see that in this case. I think we get to see informal probation and the hope that he continues to do all the things that the court has asked. And I believe it's 3 years that he has for misdemeanor probation, and following all the laws and not being in establishments that sell alcohol. And yeah, my hope is that he does make those choices and that he does have real change in his life and in the areas that he was choosing to use alcohol as probably a coping mechanism. I would say it's not something that he said, but just from what I know of using alcohol myself, my hope is that he will learn from what happened, and even if it's not felony probation.
So it's my understanding that the probation report recommended the felony probation, 90 days in jail, and then once the 3 years of probation were completed and he met all of the criteria, I think there was some more, right? Like the going to AA and those types of things. Once that was done, then it be reduced to a misdemeanor. Would you have
Yeah,
been?
that's correct.
Would you have been
I
fine
would
with
have
it
been
being
perfectly fine with that. Yes.
okay?
Yes.
And so,
But again, my goal was not for a felony to blemish his record and, cause his life to be turned upside down and to lose his job and all of those things. But again, both can be true. You can walk through felony probation and you can also come out clean on the other side if you choose to walk in accountability on what that looks like. To have it reduced to a misdemeanor, I was perfectly fine with that. But to have it be reduced at the beginning and the hopefulness that in the next 3 years, he's not going to, do anything that causes that to become a bigger deal, making the same mistakes again or getting in trouble for the same things.
and I don't want to read in between the lines, so please tell me if I'm way off base here, right? Or if I'm jumping to a conclusion. But what I hear you say when you say those things is that I want Randy to be healthy long term. I hear you saying that I
Yes,
want him to be a thriving member of society, and that opportunity was taken from him because there's no accountability. You don't want to destroy his life. You understand that there has to be accountability, responsibility for that to take place, and you're not seeing that happen here.
correct. Currently, and I'm not saying that it can't happen, but that I think it lowers maybe the percentage of why. And what I come back to is in my own recovery and other friends that I have that are in recovery. Usually, when you get in trouble and you kind of get a fire lit under your behind to do the right thing, or you're gonna, the end result is death, right? If we go full send, full pendulum swing to one way, it's if we don't, as being in recovery, then we're going to die, regardless of what that looks like. And the other side is, if we get to be a thriving member of society, and we get to invest in our community, and we get to be part of things that, if we weren't here, that we wouldn't be able to do. And so my heart for him and this process is that he, cliche as it sounds, learns from his actions. And this misdemeanor probation, helps him see, the areas in his life where change needs to happen for him to be that person, that he says that he has values in that area and arena, and goals and hopes for his family, and, investing in them with those same values. I find it hard to not have that fire lit under your butt just be something that burns out eventually, because there wasn't real accountability. And so you're doing it because it's the right thing to do in that moment. But the real change isn't happening behind the scenes, because there's no real scarcity of this is what I'm going to lose if I don't.
So with the sentence that was given out, with the misdemeanor, with the misdemeanor informal probation, with the 90 days with time served, and then that being cut in half for good behavior, and then being put on work furlough and transferred to Humboldt County so that he could meet those criteria. Do you feel that any of that is being met for him to maintain, to have the accountability that you're saying is needed for him to maintain sobriety and to maintain a healthy lifestyle going forward?
I think that those are guardrails to keep someone in his circumstances in check from going outside of them, and not abiding by what the court says, and realizing what you can get away with, and just maybe you need to take it easy from now for a little bit. But that mindset eventually builds to I'm invincible and I can drink and drive again. And so I do believe that the processes that are there are put in place to protect the community, to protect him, to protect the status of this case, for it to continue to be a misdemeanor. And my hope is that he does have real change through it. I don't know him previous and prior to this. I just know what I've heard through the courts, and his exemplary record, and not having things in his past. But I also know what he told the probation department during that report, and I did read the history that he put out, his story of his background. And I hope that he can have real change through this process. I really do. As a recovering alcoholic myself, I really hope that it's enough. And I have both sides of that coin of like, I don't know the future, and I don't want to, put anything negative out there, but I've seen it more times than not, being in recovery myself, where other people have not been able to continue in recovery because there weren't enough consequences until they finally got to a place where, something more serious happened.
Right.
That was the wake up call.
Right. There's a 12-step program of you take responsibility and you make restitution and those types of things, so that you fully understand what it is, the consequences and all of the other things. Do you think if it was reversed and you were driving the truck and Randy was waiting at the stop sign and you did all of the other things that had taken place that night, that you would be treated the same way as Randy was? That you would have the same sentence, that you would have been given the same opportunity to be transferred to another county to participate in work release so that you didn't serve time? Do you think all of those things would have been given to you?
In a perfect world, if it were exact different roles, I believe, being an outsider, not being from Crescent City and just being a passing through driver, that no, it wouldn't have gone that way. I also have an exemplary record. I don't have any blemishes on my record. I've never done anything to be in trouble with the law. I've never been arrested.
You also work for the
And
county where you live.
I do. I work. Yeah, I work. I'm in public service, and I know that I'm held to a higher standard. And um, I know that my employer, in the role that I hold at work, if I were to have a felony be charged, whether or not it was prosecuted, I would have immediately been put on administrative leave from my employment
His
until that court case
Have
was
you asked
solidified.
anybody? Have you asked anybody at victim witness or with Keith Morris, who works at the prosecutor's office, who was representing the DA in this case? Have you asked anywhere along the way why he wasn't put on admin leave?
I did, yeah, very early on when I found out he was still able to have his job and go to work. And I think part of my process of wanting to learn Crescent City on the court side of things and the maybe the I say use politics loosely, but I did watch some of the board meetings that happen that are recorded, and he was there. He was present. He was sitting at the table next to the CAO and was very much involved in those. And it kind of, stung a little bit that he could still walk out his job responsibilities. And so I did bring that up and question it. And I was assured that the appropriate people were notified in his employment, and that they don't hold anything against an employee until sentencing has happened. And if those charges had been held through sentencing as felony, then that's when things would be looked at differently. But because you're not guilty of a crime until it's been prosecuted and you've been found guilty by a court of your peers, that I guess that there can be any repercussions. And
right, which we do
kind of
have.
caught me off guard.
Right, I still agree with it being put on leave and through the process, because everybody knew what he had done. But I do also agree with the you're innocent until proven guilty kind of a thing. Wait till the details come out. But when the details came out, it was horrendous. It was truly horrendous. And again, in the first part of our conversation, you had talked about things. And when I asked you if you were not telling all of the details was to preserve his dignity, you said you were. So it's startling to me, because I agree with you. I don't think that you would have been treated the same way Randy was. I don't think I would be treated the same way Randy was. And I personally view it as a level of favoritism. But who was it that you spoke to about why he wasn't put on admin leave?
It was the local victims advocacy office.
Okay.
Who I believe did check with Mr. Morris, and I was assured that the appropriate things were happening, and that because the charges were just charges and they weren't actual, there wasn't an actual ruling in the case, that the employer felt like I would assume it's just must be their policy, or maybe just his, again, assumptions, and I don't want to guess, but those are the only conclusions that I can come to, is that whatever, policy is. I know in Oregon, we have Oregon rule that is abided by through HR and whatnot. So I'm not sure what it is for California. I know that there are some acronyms that are used that tell of how discipline happens and specific circumstances. And I wasn't able to locate those for California, and I don't know how specific they can get with different areas of service, and maybe just his level of employment and how high up he was. That may not be something that's treated the same as somebody who maybe in a lower position. It may look different. I can't speak to that.
Yeah, it's just it's so awkward to me, the whole thing. I don't know Randy really well personally, but I do see him at meetings and would say hi, and always found him to be likable. But that doesn't mean just because you're likable, you don't do dumb things. But it's remarkable to me the amount of right. So, and I understand too, because you had alluded to the sheriff's letter. He did not write that as a sheriff. He wrote it as a coworker, as a character reference. He was appalled and made that very public that he had never written a letter that would to be used to reduce his charges. But he also had letters of reference from department heads of the county. He had two sitting board of supervisors write letters for him that were used to reduce the I don't know that they also felt the same way, but were used to reduce it from a felony to a misdemeanor. And one of them wrote them on county letterhead as a board of supervisors, as a person now sitting on the
Yeah.
board. And how many of us are going to get that kind of letters when we do something? Again, how many of us are going to get transferred to another county so that we can have work furlough and get to go home and never really spend a day in jail beyond our initial arrest? And when they wrote in the letter that him drinking and driving and being involved in a hit and run was out of character, I view that as they were acknowledging that they believed that he had done these things. That Randy, when he apologized to them and said drinking and driving and hitting somebody and leaving was out of character for him so that they would write the letters, was him acknowledging what he did. So we're not even talking about when it comes to his employment that it is innocent until proven guilty. He'd apologized for his behavior. He'd apologized to the sheriff's office for having to arrest him when he's overseeing the county jail remodel, and that makes things awkward. But this is a man who, as assistant CAO, sits with the county CAO and overseeing the budgets of the prosecutor's office, who oversees the budgets for the sheriff's department, who oversees the budget for the department heads who wrote him letters. The appearance of impropriety is horrid. It
It is.
stinks so bad. It just reeks of good old boy, of possible corruption. And I don't trying to get people to jump to conclusions here and saying that these are the things that are taking place. All of this looks like favoritism. All of this looks like pulling strings and making loopholes or finding the loopholes, creating the loopholes for one man because he oversees your budget, which is why it was supposed to go and be prosecuted by the AG's office at the state of California. When, like you said, it wasn't. It was prosecuted by the prosecutor's office team, Keith Morris, that gets to be billed to the AG's office because nobody came up from Sacramento. The report that we sent out to go to Shasta's probation department to review it so that it had so that nobody could claim bias by having our Del Norte probation department do it, which again, that budget is overseen by the CAO and the assistant CAO, wasn't followed. I don't, and I asked you if you thought you would get the same treatment, and you said no. I don't think I would. I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
I don't think that anything that you just stated is far-fetched or incorrect. I stand in agreement in everything that you said, and I couldn't agree more with you. And those are definitely feelings that I have had through this process as a victim of the outcome of the choices that were made. I wish that things looked differently, and if I could have it my way from the beginning, I would have had a change of venue to a different county from the start, from a completely different DA's office, a completely different judge, and I would have been happy. I'm already happy to travel from Grants Pass to be in person for important court dates. I would have traveled to a different county gladly, even if it was further from Crescent City, for me to have real impartial system.
Wow. So, if you could, if you could say one thing to Judge Follett, what would it be?
I think I want to say, not to him, but to you, if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything at all. Is the first thing that comes to, comes to my mind. And I think that's probably more of the wanting to protect what I don't know and the reasons why, the conversations that happened, that in the rooms that I wasn't in, why things turned out the way that they did. Um, I wish he would have seen me as a victim, and I wish he would have acknowledged that the choices that Mr. Hooper made were choices. They weren't accidents and they weren't mistakes. And I feel very strongly about the letters that I did write into the court with what was going on, and in my mind and in my heart and in my life. And I wish he would have seen me. And I hope that he's not on the other end of something like this in the future and has to walk out what I walked out. I don't wish that on anybody.
If you could say something to Keith Morris, what would you say?
Do better.
If you could say one thing to Randy himself, what would you say?
I forgive you.
Megan, thank you so very much for being here with us and taking place in this conversation. It needed to be had.
Thanks for seeing me, Heather, and inviting me into this space. It really is, I think, a part of my healing journey and something that I truly had the desire to do. And really, I feel like it's the first time that I've been heard, and my story has been able to be shared, and really adds value to what I've walked through in the last year.
I hope you find peace and complete healing, Megan, and that you are able to one day come back and visit us in Norte County and have the same joy as you did prior to this occurring to you.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of Community Square on KFUG, and I'm suddenly reminded of, and I don't know which translation of the Bible it came from, but Ecclesiastes 3:16. And I saw in the house of judgment, and there was none. And I just have one question for my neighbors here in Norte County. What do we do? What do we do?